Hello and welcome to this IBTV Spotlight video, today considering clinical readiness. I'm joined today by Josh, Carol, Heather and Priya as we talk about the significant bottlenecks that are facing developers as we're looking at CGTs reaching those critical clinical stages. To get us started, let's just start nice and broad. What are some of those biggest challenges that are facing CGTs as we're looking at preparing entry into the clinic? Josh, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, biggest challenges in my world and how I help out is just the actual manufacturing of the cell therapy products. Certainly there's delivery issues and clinician issues, preparedness. I'm trying to help the field simplify and standardize the way that they manufacture cells so that it's going to be easier to bring on new sites, whether it's decentralized or other. So that's kind of been my focus, and I continue to see that as a massive challenge, is just simplifying the manufacturing.
So from our perspective, we're really focused on infrastructure and enabling manufacturing, very similarly to how Josh has described it. So we will provide a manufacturing space for a hospital that may not have that capability. Maybe they're seeing patients today and they want to start clinical trials, working in partnership with therapeutic developers, and they don't have that capability today, but they'd like to. So we work very hard to build them a solution that is enabling so that they can take that on and scale and serve more patients.
Yeah, I think, all of those are really great. But a lot of our clinical partners really don't have the capacity to start brand new with something that is completely standardized. A lot of what I've been hearing across the industry and what I've been seeing and what I've actually felt in my own life is that they have their own space. They have their own way of doing things. They want these therapies. The patients need them so desperately. So they want to onboard them as quickly as possible, but the infrastructure that they currently have doesn't allow for super quick onboarding. There are things that have to happen. They have to make sure they have the right equipment, the right way to be able to handle these products, or even accession them back out so that these can be done. And then there's training of their folks. There's SOPs that have to be created to make sure that they've got a standard approach to these pieces. And it's being able to get them started and supported in that way. But then being able to give them a standardized approach to document everything. And so part of what we do and support, not just what I do, but also what our company does, is give them that standardized approach. And so any communication that they have to do out to new manufacturers or have to receive that back in, we give them the capacity to be able to digitalize that, to be able to support some of that.
Yeah, these are all wonderful points. And I think that we tend to think as an industry that our job's done once our product goes into LN2 or is packaged and the fill finish is done. But the reality is that that true last mile is at the hospital where it's being administered to the patient, and having multiple SOPs and batch records and processes and even labeling of materials, is a real pain point for our clinicians. And so something that we really need to take into consideration as we're developing these therapies. I've spent the last 12 years of my life on the starting materials side as well as, manufacturing. And so I think, for me, donor engagement, donor sustainability for allogeneic therapies, we focus a lot on the patient, which is exactly where we should be focused. But we have to remember the human on the other end of the spectrum where it all starts for an allogeneic therapy. And, access to high quality, well-characterized, clinically relevant starting materials that can be taken into manufacturing and provide these therapies is really, really important. But I think every unit operation in the industry right now, we've come so far, we're doing so well, but there is great opportunity for improvement all along the way.
I think obviously we've spoken to quite a lot of different perspectives and different aspects of that kind of preparedness for that clinical environment. That takes a lot of skill, expertise. Everybody has different skills, expertise. We're representing a lot of perspectives here. How do we engage the right talent and the right expertise for that clinical experience if we're not forgetting that final mile? And what attracts the right person to those roles that are going to help address these bottlenecks, essentially?
I think we have some organizations like AABB, for instance, that have taken more of an active role in this, and some other professional organizations that are starting to bring those people into the fold more and engage them and get that feedback. And I think it's, as with anything, it's really important to have all the stakeholder voices represented, because we don't walk in each other's shoes day to day, and it's very easy to just focus on the problems at hand and the solutions we're creating for that unit operation, like I said, or that piece of the puzzle, but it all has to really come together. And so I think we're starting to see more engagement from nurses and other healthcare professionals who are, really just wanting to get these therapies to their patients, and I think very willing to talk to us and help us.
Oh, absolutely. Pretty you're spot on. Folks like ISCT are partnering actually with some of the academic organizations to create training programs. We know that the talent is not there. Every organization feels that pain when they lose somebody for the right or wrong reason. And unfortunately, because they're so few and far between, we have to step up and kind of support that. So being able to have those specific programs, we're seeing a lot, not just training programs, but also mentoring programs that are coming through to be able to help then sustain the people as they come into these spaces so that we don't lose the talent, because the turnover is expensive.
Yeah.
The minute that you lose somebody like that, you're hemorrhaging the money that could then be going into the support of the program itself. So I think it's imperative that we continue to focus the way that we have been.
Yeah.
But I'm super encouraged by just what I've seen in the last year of these emerging training and mentoring programs.
It even goes back to even doing the workforce plan for clinical centers that are starting out, and just even putting together what that workforce needs to look like and budgeting it is a daunting task. So I think that's really tricky. And then the hospitals that are making that investment, they'll get their teams trained. We hear this a lot from some of the clinicians that we work with, and then they go off to work for industry where they can make more money. So I think as you start to look at the future, these 2-year like biotechnician programs are really going to be essential to build up the workforce enough to meet the demand.
And at least on the manufacturing side, I guess what we've seen work well as we've started a CDMO ourselves and look to hire good people. I do like these, hyper-focused, shorter programs, right? You develop somebody that's, wants to be in the clean room, wants to be an expert. Maybe they're elevating themselves from like a standard assembly manufacturing person at like a traditional med device space. There's a lot of talent there. Those people are really good at what they do. And we're going to need them at, biotech therapy developers, at CDMOs, at hospital sites, because more and more manufacturing is going to happen at the hospital site.
And as that happens, as we look at scale and kind of building that capacity, either on site, it doesn't necessarily have to be on site, but if we're looking at that kind of capacity development, what are kind of practical things, or let's say considerations and recommendations that these clinical centers need to be aware of in order to make sure that they are ready for what's to come?
Training is huge, right? And workforce, as we've talked about, but I think also infrastructure, right? Cold chain and logistics. And do you have someone in operations who really understands that and can pull it all together, right? Because if the therapy gets there and someone is not locked in on how you thaw that and you administer that and make sure that all the documentation is in place, you could end up not treating the patient or having something go, have the therapy be lost. And we know how much cost there is, not only on the manufacturing side of it, but a human life on the other end.
I think it's twofold. I agree with you. I think part of the issue is that communication and what's required comes too quickly, too late. I think we have an opportunity moving forward in the industry to be able to proactively have these conversations and understand proactively what is going to be required prior to the release of these drug therapies. I don't know how we're going to do that. I don't have that answer. But that to me is low-hanging fruit, where we have the ability to really start to arm our brothers and sisters in the clinical space to get ready. The other piece of that is making sure that you're adopting versatile solutions within your space that will be able to allow you to pivot if there are differences or changes that are coming through with the therapies. Many of them are very similar in how you have to manage them or handle them. Some of them are not. And so being able to put that infrastructure in, whether it's your clean rooms, your equipment that you're utilizing, your software that you are using, or simply your training for your folks, ensuring that has a flexibility to it, that will allow you to scale without worrying about the extra that you're going to need for each one of these components.
I think one of the tricky things is if I'm a clinical center and I'm not truly treating patients with CAR T today, for example, there's no checklist that tells me even where to start. That's why organizations, I think, like FACT are really important for clinical centers to partner early so they have a good understanding what it would take to even get to an accreditation, because that exercise is very extensive. And also they have to build a business case. If they're going to make these investments, how are they going to get that return on investment in patient care and so on? So it's quite complicated, but starting very early and looking at what is it going to take even from what the referral network to bring patients into the center is going to need to look like. But that business case, that big checklist is really important, and organizations like FACT can really help out with that.
I think these first groups and hospitals through the system to be able to manufacture and handle and administer CAR T, I think those organizations with the FACT and ISCTs of the world in training, ideally there's people looking at this and saying, what's good for the whole is also good for me, and they're not keeping this to themselves, because we need to learn from each other. You can't have every new hospital system trying to start from scratch, because how do you build the infrastructure? You're going to make mistakes. How do you determine what you need? You mentioned it, Heather, about flexibility or something, adaptability of whatever you choose. And people get stuck if they don't know what they're doing. They're like, the first thing that sounds good, all right, we're going to build our operation around that. And you find out in a few years, it's not flexible to adapt to the new modality coming through. So there's so many factors at play. I think more and more as an industry, we just need to be like, the greater good. How do we share what's working and what's not working, which is difficult. Yeah.
Because I think that the onus is on us to make the healthcare providers' lives easier. And we're not doing a good job of that right now. In reality, if you listen to them, we're creating a lot of pain points and bottlenecks for them. And in the name of IP and proprietary technology and proprietary processes, and that is all very important, but we have to figure out how we collaborate and share and move it forward and deliver it in a way that we're not solving for one problem while creating a bunch of others.
Right, because at the end of the day, those clinicians are your end users. And so without them, it doesn't matter what therapy you create. If it's not adopted, it's not going to benefit the industry either, right? Nobody is going to be making money. But at the end is the patient. And so their responsibility is to protect them. Our responsibility is to support them. So it's our responsibility to make this easier, not harder.
Yeah, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So as an industry, we need these wins.
Yeah, I absolutely love what CERM has done with setting up the alpha clinics in California. I think that's a great model where you've got academic institutions that are a little bit mature in their journey in this space, and having them work with community centers, really adopting some of those best practices and lessons learned. But deep partnering between industry and clinics like the alpha clinics is really important, because we can help them figure out how to scale these therapies, but that knowledge sharing is really critical.
And what does that kind of partnership strategy look like? Because if we can see that in action, if there is a fantastic example out there of how this is working, how can we kind of inspire that call to action to partner, to connect, to create a network where actually we're not creating more problems, we're bringing the solution to the table as part of a successful partnership?
Ideally, we have some of these success stories that get more and more momentum behind them, and people can see themselves in some success story, and hopefully more and more of again, the tool technology provider, software provider, it's a bit of a race, right? You're trying to become the standard, and I think it can cloud this, well, it's RIP. We don't want to really share a lot of information, but also you're limiting this pool of available, business at the end of the day and access for patients. So I think it's kind of everybody has to get involved and put their, collaboration foot forward and be a little more open to other groups asking questions and sharing that information publicly. And I mean, that's why we're talking here. That's why we're at this event. So, but it would be great to get more info on those, the alpha clinics and some of these other spaces where could you almost franchise these operational pieces. So it's like the layout of the clean room, if it's this size to service this many people, can you replicate that with SOPs and the whole operation basically? And then you can show that hospital system, like, here's what it is going to cost you, here's what it's going to take to run it. And they can make that decision with a little bit more clarity than today. Is like, we know our patients want CAR T, but we have no idea what to do.
Right. And we're doing some of that work with Caring Cross now. We've developed a model for a modular clean room that will go to various places around the world. We've standardized on the design, so anyone can be trained anywhere to work in that clean room space. The SOPs can be tailored to that space. And the thing I love about it is that with the workflow, the equipment, the flow of supplies and everything, we've been able to get to the place where we know it'll be like $30,000 to $50,000 per patient. Then the hospital can truly start to see what that ROI is going to be, and they can actually benefit from some of that and actually get enough money to actually fund the center. So that work's really important, and we're also very much about knowledge sharing and the things that we're going to be learning. And I think that's going to be really important. I think that's an obligation for anyone doing the kind of work that we're doing right now, is that knowledge sharing and lessons learned.
I think the other piece is that the CGT industry, when it first started, when CAR T first came out, it was such a novel thing. And we knew that every patient needed it. And so it was almost like a supply and demand situation where we had to just do the things that were required to be able to adopt that therapy. How expensive they were, whatever it took, it didn't matter, right? Now we're seeing so many new therapies that are coming through. This is becoming a normalization effect. And so at ICT this last year, I saw one of the medical directors of a prestigious program say in one of her panel talks, it's now time where the supply is no longer an issue, right? And it's time where we have the capacity to collaborate and have these conversations about what do the clinics need from the manufacturers to be able to be successful. So those conversations are starting to open up on both ends. We're talking about the fact that we need to normalize this and give platforms and quorums. They're also saying the same thing, where they're ready to, kind of talk about the things that they need infrastructurally to be able to be successful. So this is going to be a really iterative, very exciting time, I think, coming through in this next year. I anticipate we're going to see a lot of these conversations in multiple different conferences where we have a mixed bag of folks from the industry and the clinic being able to have these new innovative approaches on how this is going to happen.
I think in terms of, examples of where these sorts of collaborations have worked, not exactly in this space, but, very much a model that's applicable is something like a biofab and Army, right? A public-private consortium where there is a pre-competitive element to it. And there isn't maybe the hesitation of, well, I'm handing over my know-how to someone who is a competitor, but doing it in an environment where it feels safe to do that. And so I think there are elements of that we should be, championing and borrowing from and emulating more and more.
And what can we do? We've discussed examples of partnerships, we've discussed knowledge sharing, team, and kind of, building those skills and those expertise. But if we start looking at things like, more and more therapies are coming through, the approval processes, the rate and the pace is increasing. And what can we do proactively to support the clinical side of this industry for these new and innovative therapies that are coming through that perhaps we're not even ready yet ourselves as a group, as an industry? how can we set ourselves up for success as we start pushing those boundaries even further?
I think one of the things we need to do is to get more involved on a legislative level as well. We talk a lot about regulation, but we do not talk enough about the importance of legislation here and educating lawmakers globally and making sure that they are putting the right elements in place to allow the regulators to effectively do their job and get these therapies to market, and reimbursement schemes, and really democratizing access to these great therapies that we're developing. Because at the end of the day, if we're ignoring the people who are making the laws that are affecting us, we're going to have a huge problem.
100%. 100%. Across the board, it's all about money at the end of the day, unfortunately. So to be able to adopt some of these therapies, it's nearly impossible because of exactly what you just said. We have to be mouthy about this. We have to get involved with this. We have to be the ones that are starting to set that pace on what that can do.
We have to find ways to reduce the cost, bottom line. I mean, back in the day, and you remember this well, when the biologic space, when monoclonal antibodies were through the roof, very expensive. I think they're somewhere around $3 now to make, something around that. So, we can get there in the cell and gene therapy space. Allogeneic is certainly one way. Getting processes to be more and more efficient on the autologous side of things. I think getting the cost down makes those conversations easier when we're talking about overall cost of healthcare, and then also working with payers. Like, how do we make those reimbursements more reasonable? And obviously, if we're bringing the cost down and we're efficient, we'll go a long ways.
And you brought up a good point. It is a money problem. It always is. And so, like, we as an industry, we need to know our numbers. We need to talk about the fact that amazing to hear via Caring Cross that we can get down to $30,000 to $50,000 for a autologous CAR T dose, which is really unheard of right now. But it is possible if you focus on using simple tools that allow for essentially high throughput manufacturing in small space. So from a manufacturing side, can we get more like the biologic side or the medical device side, where it was smaller space? So how to know your numbers, know the actual plan for those numbers, and ideally share that information publicly, as we've talked about.
Yeah, and I think that there's no one solution for this. I'm sure there will be a centralized manufacturing element where we can do things at a bigger scale with some automation. And then there will be models where they're more point of care. Maybe they're using simpler technology where it's easier for technicians to actually do the work. So I think this can be a mixed model, all with the need to drive efficiencies and lower costs. But that's something we'll have to come together in those groups that you mentioned.
And I had this conversation just this morning, right? We tend to think about things as very binary, and I think that's just a human bias. But there's so much grayscale we need to operate in, and it's not going to be autologous or allogeneic, and it's not going to be centralized or decentralized or point of care. It's going to be all of the above. And so we need to continue to build processes and products and technologies that address all of the above. But the lucky thing is we have some of the smartest people in the world in this industry, so we can solve these problems if we just keep working together on them.
Fabulous. That is actually all we have time for this conversation, although I'm sure with the right questions we could probably keep chatting for hours. So we'll wrap that up there. But thank you everybody for joining me. And yeah, that's us.
Thank you.